KubeCon. There's so much excitement to be back out with everybody in person. Today, we've got a very special guest, and Yishan from HashiCorp. Hopefully, I got that right. Working on that. So, Yishan, if you want to tell people a little bit about yourself and also about HashiCorp.
Of course, yeah. Thanks, Blake. Blake nailed the pronunciation first time. You can't get any better than that. That's
Nice.
got to be a milestone in itself. So as Blake introduced, I'm Yishan. I'm a product manager at HashiCorp. I've been at the company for almost 3 years now, and a little bit about HashiCorp as an overview. So HashiCorp offers a suite of cloud infrastructure automation tools that are available in open source and enterprise. And our products are widely adopted, and each of the offerings are used by leading companies in the Fortune 500 and Global 2000.
Very cool. And I know, like, for developers, it's always a very popular tool. So what is that kind of about HashiCorp that sort of makes it more developer friendly?
Yeah, absolutely, Blake. So for HashiCorp in particular, there are two of the many products that we offer that very much pertain closely to the developer experience, and how developers interact with infrastructure. So the first two in particular are going to be HashiCorp Nomad and HashiCorp Waypoint. So Nomad is HashiCorp's own orchestrator, so very similar to Kubernetes. It has some nuances and differences, but the main one is that Nomad is an orchestrator that can deploy and manage containerized and non-containerized applications. The one that is the most pertinent and most exciting and most relevant to KubeCon is actually also HashiCorp Waypoint, which is actually our newest product. And HashiCorp Waypoint is an application deployment tool that aims to simplify and ease how developers deploy their applications onto Kubernetes, AWS, ECS, Nomad, any other systems that the company has set up today in infrastructure. How do we simplify and ease that process?
And so how do you sort of stay on top of, like, with the usual problems that developers have, and sort of rolling out, new updates and features as you're getting, like, so widely adopted?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Blake. So this is, I think, is a big testament to the founders of HashiCorp, Mitchell and Armon, as well as our executive leadership across all the different organizations. But the way HashiCorp works is that we subscribe very deeply to a set of principles that are very much rooted in the Unix philosophy. So HashiCorp today has anywhere from 5 to 6 products, and each of these products are very much designed from the ground up, from day one to production. They're designed to tackle one specific layer in the infrastructure stack. So usually, I think when people think about infrastructure, the market has kind of oscillated from extremes of having these products that can do everything, all in one platforms, to having these small, composable, piecemeal bits of infrastructure tooling, right? So what HashiCorp is really optimized for is subscribing to that Unix philosophy of having every tool focus on a very specific layer. So HashiCorp today is most obviously well known for things like Terraform and Vault that very clearly own and do piecemeal bits of the workflow. So for instance, Terraform, when you need a server provision, when you need infrastructure provisioning, when you need instances on AWS, Terraform is the leading product in that space, right? With Vaults from HashiCorp as well, that's the leader in secrets management and storage, even if you're using Kubernetes. For Nomad, it's about scheduling and deploying application. And for Waypoint, it's about easing the process of deploying applications itself. So all of the different products are very focused on a very tight vision and are very tightly scoped to really winning the workflow on one specific area in the stack.
Very cool. And since we are at KubeCon, and for those that may not be familiar with it, are there any big news, announcements, releases coming out of HashiCorp?
Yeah, absolutely, Blake. So the biggest release we have is actually just this morning from Waypoint. So Waypoint, we just had the 0.6 release that went out earlier today, and it's probably our most jam-packed and exciting release yet. So we've got a whole slew of new and powerful features in Waypoint 0.6 that really strengthen and deepen Waypoint's support for Kubernetes. So with Waypoint in particular, some of the highlights of the 0.6 release include, having an official Helm chart. So if you are new to Waypoint, but you're already running Kubernetes clusters today in some capacity, what you're able to do now is use our new official Helm chart, and then you can install Waypoint directly on your Kubernetes clusters with near zero configuration. And the same is true when it comes to deploying those same applications on Waypoint through Kubernetes. You can also use the Helm charts there. So these are some of the examples of how the installation and setup process for getting started with Waypoint, if you're already using Helm and Kubernetes, these are some of the ways that those steps have been reduced dramatically in today's release to very little configuration and adjustment needed. It integrates right into your workflow, and it's about getting your developers successful on deploying applications on Kubernetes rather than wrangling YAML learning all the different concepts just to
Mm.
get started.
Yeah, making developers' lives easier, and so I think our audience will definitely appreciate and applaud that. We don't have an applause button, but if we did, I'm sure that they'd be hitting that thing. And sort of switching gears, since HashiCorp has this market adoption, and working with your customers, what are some of the trends that you're seeing so far this year? It's a little bit unusual, right, with the pandemic,
Absolutely.
but what are some of the wins or challenges and obstacles that you're seeing in the space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, this year's KubeCon is really exciting because, for the first time we're seeing a lot of the same, customers, practitioners come back in person. And it's, when you get that energy in person, you can't compare any of that to something virtual, right?
Or a Zoom call, yes.
Exactly, or a Zoom call, right? Zoom calls are always so transactional, but in a conference, you have
Mm,
more of these free form dynamic conversations, and from there, it's exactly like you said, like you can get a good sense for what are practitioners focused on. What are they thinking about? What are they thinking about today, and what are the fears or concerns that they have for next quarter, next year, and so forth in their infrastructure. So, to me, the biggest trends I see in KubeCon is one is really the maturity of vendors. I mean, when we were setting up the booth, I was just amazed by, how many vendors there are, how many different ways you can get support for your Kubernetes clusters. I mean, there's backup, storage, security. I mean, you can see that all the trends really manifest in the vendor showcase, and you can also see that same maturity extend out in the practitioners as well. So right now, compared to 2, 3 years ago, there's really no shortage of solutions. If you're trying to get started with Kubernetes as an enterprise, you can be speaking to anywhere from 2 to 3 different types of vendors just for a logging or a backup solution, right? So I think the maturity is there. And I think the trend that we're slowly gravitating towards as a market is about, now that we know we have all these different solutions, right? It's about, if you're an enterprise, how do you pick the right solutions that work for you, and how do you form a workflow through there, right? So for HashiCorp in particular, there's a very central principle that we focus on, which is workflows and not technologies. So with HashiCorp, there's a very intentional emphasis on not getting wrapped up too much into buzzwords or trends, but more so, what are the underlying humans on top of, at the end of the day, after all this code and all these cool tools and solutions and trends, what are they really trying to accomplish with that workflow? And I think it's, the same central thing is like, how do you make developers
mm.
successful deploying on these complicated systems, right? Kubernetes has certainly gotten easier over time, but it's still not quite, a walk in the park, that we would all like it to be, right? So I think we see a lot of tremendous progress there. And I still think we're still trying to find that balance right now between, vendor-driven solution and also practitioner-driven solutions. Kubernetes is a fantastic open source community. And then at the same time, it's like, well, what is the workflow we're trying to achieve? And I think slowly but surely, with all the different vendors coming in the space, we're seeing parts of that workflow really become visible to practitioners. So if you're, an old, banking company that's dealing with mainframe, hundreds of different tech stacks, or if you're a new startup, right, that you have only 2 to 3 developers, but you're blazing fast, you're containerizing, you're writing microservices, you're starting to see that there are solutions emerge, commercial solutions emerge that will slowly give you that vision for how you want to progress your infrastructure forward.
Nice, and that kind of pivots really well into the next question. So if you looked into a crystal ball for next year, everyone's going to be talking about trends. A lot of times they never come to fruition, or they're so buzzword heavy they might as well have come true.
Absolutely.
But for next year, is there something that a trend maybe that you're excited about, or is there one that's like really under the radar that you're like, hey, wait a minute,
Yeah.
this is one that's really going to jump out next year?
Yeah, I actually think the developer workflow that you were talking about, like, I think that is actually the trend that's going to be coming up next year. And the reason I say that is because, a lot of the different talks that we had this year at KubeCon, a lot of the different vendors that we've been interfacing with that are also present and available in today's KubeCon as well in the showcase, what you can see is a lot of the focus is around operationalizing Kubernetes, right? How do you maintain it? How do you secure it, right? How do you back up? How do you restore? You can see there's a lot of vendors in that space, and rightfully so. These are big problems. But I think the problem, right, after you've conquered the, hey, here's how I manage and operate Kubernetes on a day-to-day basis, here's how I secure it. Once you get past that, then I think you naturally go back to the developer experience. It's, hey, if I'm an SRE today, if I'm a DevOps, if I'm an infrastructure engineer today, and after this year, my competency in Kubernetes is growing, right? I am now feeling a lot more successful. I'm feeling a lot more competent in my ability to manage Kubernetes. Then I think the goalpost really shifts to, okay, I'm successful managing Kubernetes, but how do I enable the other key stakeholders in my organization to be successful in Kubernetes? I think that audience is really the developers, as you nailed, at the beginning of this call, like, right? If you're a developer, you're not going to have a lot of the day-to-day experience with Kubernetes. You're not going to be working in YAML every day. A lot of developers, coming out of college, like me, when we were studying computer science, infrastructure and distributed systems is not something on the course catalog, in an undergraduate curriculum at least. So these are kind of new areas. Like, how do you take these concepts that, as a Kubernetes operator, that you've learned, over the
Mm.
past 2, 3 years and this year, right? How do you take that and distill that in an experience and a workflow where, if you're a developer at that same organization, and you just want to deploy your application, you want to be successful on Kubernetes as well, but there's only so much you can do when you're also juggling all these different tech stacks as well, right? So
Mm.
how much infrastructure should you know to be successful deploying on Kubernetes as a developer? I really think that's the up and coming trend, right? Once we secure the clusters, once we're confident about managing them, I really think the next goalpost is, how do we empower the developers? I think a lot of Kubernetes progress has been around empowering operators. I really think that goalpost changes to the developers next year.
Yeah, some great insight. That's amazing, and I'm sure our developer audience will love to hear that. And then just a little bit about yourself,
For sure.
Ishan. So, is this kind of like where you expected when you're 5 years old? You're like, "Hey, I'm going to
Of
be in the Kubernetes space and
course.
cloud native, doing all this great stuff," or what does your sort of career journey look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, Blake. My career journey, I think, is actually pretty mixed. So I actually, I was very fortunate to grow up in San Francisco, be around the Bay Area. So, startups, the whole founder culture, the idea of starting your own business, I think very much like, what people have done at DZone, right? That entrepreneurial spirit was always in me. So for me, ever since I graduated high school, I was always trying all these different startups, consumer goods,
Uh,
making paper straws. That's actually one of the funniest things. One of the projects I did, after college was looking around and just, I found, hey, there's an opportunity to, make the world's first paper straw for bubble tea. I just thought, hey, that seems like a cool challenge. Let me dig into that. I learned a lot about import and shipping. So for me, that's been a lot of my career, right? So I actually didn't really make a formal and like entry into infrastructure or distributed systems until I actually got an internship at Mesosphere. So I think people with more of a historian view might remember, before Kubernetes, there was, another very popular scheduler at the time called Mesos. So I was very fortunate to get an internship there. And from there, my exposure to distributed systems just really took off. I was very fortunate to have many great mentors at that company, and even still to this day at HashiCorp, who have just taught me more about infrastructure. And you start really understanding that there's a lot more to software, computer science, and technology than just web apps. Typically when in an undergraduate context, or even in a day-to-day context, we usually think of tech as, Fang, Facebook, web apps, that kind of thing, consumer apps. But you start realizing that infrastructure is really the consistent piece that enables all that innovation to happen on the consumer end. Whether you're going into your mobile app, right, to look at your mobile banking, or if I'm checking into my flight tomorrow back to San Francisco, right? These are all different ways where all the same technology is all powered by infrastructure that's underlying to that tech that you interact with at the top layer.
Got it. And so you're at the right city at the right time, and then start your first internship at the right company at the right time. So there's so much great timing that goes on with that journey. It's amazing.
Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that has to do with, I think, pleasant surprises. For me, if you had asked me, if we wind the clock back to, I think either 2012 when I graduated high school or 2017 when I graduated college, if you asked me, I would be working in infrastructure. I think, the
Doing Kubernetes, cloud native,
exactly.
like sure, that's exactly it.
Exactly, right? I think the 21, 22-year-old me would just be absolutely flummoxed. I would
Mm.
have no idea what you were talking about. I would say, what's infrastructure? All I wanted to do is like think about, consumer apps and all that stuff. But no, I mean, for me, I think with the way that the infrastructure space is evolving and with the prevalence of open source, certainly more so than ever before, I think there's just a great number of organic opportunities for people of really any age and any background to interact and start working with a lot of these same leading companies and vendors. With everything open source, there's so many different ways that you can contribute. I think one of the biggest things is that you don't even actually have to code. You can help out a lot of these companies indirectly by contributing to documentation, helping with triage. There's so many different ways you can interface compared to 4 or 5 years ago. well, at this point, it's 8 years ago since I graduated high school. But
Right.
with GitHub, all these things are public. You can track the progress of Kubernetes, but also any CNCF project nowadays, and you can directly interface with the same people that you're meeting in the booth virtually, right, over the same bits of material and the key pieces of content. So for me, I think the insertion point has really expanded over time. I think before, you would have to, like me, right, try to find that foot in through an internship, an early job, an associate job, a junior level job. But now I think the way things are opening, I mean, it's really democratizing. It's really empowering that anyone with any skill set, you can go and you can contribute. You're not going to be judged for it, and you're also not going to be gate kept on it based on qualifications or where you went to school. It's all open, right? The focus is the technology, and the focus is the progress.
Got it. And then that's a kind of a great question we get asked a lot. So for someone in middle school, high school, watching to the watching this today, they're like, okay, well, what's like one or two steps I should take or think
Yeah.
about with career advice? I want to be in the space, but I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I think the first thing is learning. That was actually what I did for very early on in my career. I think obviously today I sound very confident and competent and very, in the know about the terms and the industry. But, like anyone who, does something for the first time, when I first started at Mesos as an intern many years ago, I was in the same place. I was in a very much learning mindset where, I was able to sit and absorb. And I think for anyone, in a younger age or even coming from a different background, regardless of age, there are so many different ways you can absorb the content. I mean, the KubeCon is a great privilege if you can attend it in person, but a lot of the same talks are available online. On YouTube, they get released over time. The knowledge here is actually very widespread, and that's the best part about working in something that's open source is that there's that continuous organic effort to just keep spreading the knowledge. There's no gatekeeping of that knowledge, right? So I think if one is coming from a younger age or a different background where they're not so familiar, there are so many ways you can get started through YouTube, through emails, and frankly, there are a lot of people who are willing to help if you reach out. I've not seen a a a, a sub kind of like a subset of tech that is so accessible like infrastructure. Developer advocates, people who you can just tweet, you can meet both virtually or in person, who are more than happy to tell you, hey, here's what my career journey has been like. Here are the things I've learned. Here's how I navigated this industry. The accessibility and the openness and warmth of the collective community, whether it's Kubernetes, whether it's Nomad, whether it's HashiCorp tools, whether it's Red Hat, it's all there, right? And it's there for anyone to do.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then last two questions. And so, is this your first KubeCon that you've been to, or you've been to many?
This is my first one.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, what have been like some of your favorite moment or moments so far?
Yeah, for me, as a product manager, a lot of my interaction is
Customers face to face.
customers face to face, and it's also very much a relationship thing. I
Right.
think some people might think that if you were to work at a tech company, really only sales needs to be the one to nurture relationships. But if you're working in product or even engineering to some extent, right, it's always still a relationship things because it's always still just humans working with humans, right?
Right.
When you're able to put a face to the name, I mean, that's the most exciting thing. I met so many great partners that I've worked with over the years that I've only ever met through Zoom or email. In this conference, I've met great contributors who I didn't even recognize until they introduced themselves. Like when you get to see that and you're able to harness that collaboration energy, like for instance, right in front of the HashiCorp booth. I mean, that's probably one of the most fulfilling parts of the job. Obviously the free T-shirts and the raffles are always
Right.
really
Right.
nice, but for me, like what I'll remember the most really from this coupon is really the interactions and the people that I've met and the openness of the dialogue around, hey, here's what I'm seeing, here's what you're seeing. Let's compare notes and see if we're thinking in the same ways about the trends, about the progress, about what's coming next year and the year after. I think that's really a magical element you can't replicate.
Nice. And what's some of the feedback you're getting from customers?
Yeah, some of the feedback I'm getting from customers is really, I understand this space. As a customer, my competency in Kubernetes and vendors, I really understand that. Then the questions that we're getting a lot from customers is, how do I navigate this, right? If I'm
Right.
coming to KubeCon as a customer, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the vendor showcase booth. There's easily over 20, 30 different booths there, right? And within each category, like I said before, with logging, with backup, with
Right. Right.
security, right? You could be talking anywhere from 4 to 6 of these vendors, some new, some big, some
Right. Right.
small. And so for me, a lot of the questions I've been getting around from customers is around, What is your guidance around these things, right? Where do you start? And for us, with HashiCorp, as I alluded to earlier, the philosophy really starts from the workflow. We always start from the problem of, hey, what is the problem you're trying to achieve? And then you can slowly start to piece together, here's the different vendors that you could use, here's the different solutions that are available, whether open source or closed source, and here's the different ways you can piece that together to solve the problem. So we started with the problem, and a lot of the same times, customers, when they have an enterprise relationship with a vendor, obviously KubeCon's example, but to me, this is no different than if we went to the GitOps con or anything like that. It's about solving their problems, right? So a lot of the customers is about, hey, we solved this problem, this quarter, but next quarter we have this new target, we have this new milestone we're trying to hit. How can we get there, with your infrastructure pieces?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And last question.
Of course.
So, are you on Twitter where people can go follow you? What's some of the resources for HashiCorp? So people should go, if you're watching this now, they can follow you on Twitter, HashiCorp on Twitter. Is there a website, a blog, YouTube? What should people know there? And anything else exciting going on with HashiCorp?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, to close, I will say I don't have a personal Twitter. I don't think too highly of my own thoughts. Anything I say, like in this interview, I like to hone it through multiple layers of
Okay.
conversation before I ever say anything. So no, I don't have a personal Twitter,
Got it.
but HashiCorp does have a Twitter.
Very good.
I think the thing is, for anyone who wants to learn more about HashiCorp, who wants to even get involved in the space, right, or just get a little more exposure, you can actually go to learn.hashicorp.com, where HashiCorp has free, interactive, and guided tools, in these hosted sandbox environments that are very secure. They won't cost you anything, right? They're not going to break your computer. And you can go there and you can play with HashiCorp tools. You can start learning, hey, what are servers? You can learn all the different concepts through the exposure of that. And for me, that's one of the greatest pieces of tools that HashiCorp has around enablement, right? Because the learn guides that are written on learn.hashicorp.com, they apply to all the different products that HashiCorp has, right? So for instance, if you're interested in security, you can go look at the Vault guides. If you're interested in, the server side of it, you can look at Packer or Nomad. If you're interested in the application deployment piece, you can look at Waypoint. If you're looking at, what is the next kind of security look like, you can look at the Boundary tutorial. So there's a huge swath of tutorials and guides and resources and learning materials that, based on where one wants to, one feels that itch, if their interest in infrastructure, you can go in right in there and find it.
Oh, that's very cool. I love that. Just make it easier, because we're always trying to get customers down that runway with as least friction as possible so they can get off the ground. But oftentimes, like when it doesn't happen, there's so much like manual hand-to-hand combat, and yeah, it just never scales, works right. But Ishan, that was just so amazing to learn about HashiCorp, a little bit about your career journey. Noted about the paper straws for bubble tea. Bubble tea is really great. If you've never tried it, go find a place right now. HashiCorp is also out here at KubeCon. There's still time left. Stop by their booth. I'm sure they have some cool things and you can learn about. Just heard about their key resource. So it's a huge honor to have you on today here for our DZone audience. We are here with HashiCorp, who's wanting to make developers' lives easier. So Ishan, thanks for being on.
Thank you, Blake. Thank you for having me.